Coming up, it's the other member of that big three. Yes, the mysterious man who's yet to step on the court for the Brooklyn Nets, one Ben Simmons. He was also at Media Day and gave a lot of good feedback around those questions around his health, both physical and mental. We dive into it next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it's the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie, owner-operator of DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings. From DraftKings to FanDuel, he's got you covered. I'm Adam Arbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast with my boy Andy Mack. We thank you for making us the first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms. And Doug, we said at the top, we'll say it here again. It wasn't just Kevin Durant. It wasn't just Kyrie Irving. As much as both of them, I think the fan base and the media were interested in talking with Ben Simmons. A little bit different in terms takeaways from his media day session. How did you feel once he got up to the podium and biggest headline said, "Yeah, I'm ready to go"?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't all that surprising to have like his tone during this media day, because if you listen to the Old Man and the Three podcast that he did with JJ Redick, I do think this what he talked about here was a sort of a carryover from that, which is a little more defiant than you saw Durant or Irving. We'll get into some of the specific quotes from both things, because I think they're actually two. I thought the Old Man and the Three was like a primer media day for Simmons to then get up onto this, right? So, and a lot of the stuff was very similar, but it was a little more defiant, a little bit more probably energetic at the same time. Like he, giving some specifics about the team. So it was definitely not the same tone as Durant and Kyrie, but that makes sense, because if you think about it, if you think about the differences in the situations, is like while Simmons was on the team last year for the playoff run, he wasn't really on the team, right? Like he was contractually on the team, but there was like really no other part of him that was actually a net, really. And so from that, it makes sense. So from him, it's more of a Ben Simmons thing. From the Durant and Kyrie thing, it was more about like an overall team thing. And I think that's kind of to be expected.
Yeah, and it's funny too, because even though he didn't play for the Nets at all, he was a topic of conversation since they got traded for him, right? And he addressed that when they asked about what happened when it came down to that playoff series and not being able to play. It woke up on the morning of Game 4 and all of a sudden was having real issues from his head down to his toes. I mean, he said every part of his body was really ailing him. So he addressed that from that.
He said he couldn't walk. Like he said, he basically couldn't walk. Like he was in excruciating pain radiating from his back. Just to like clarify just a little bit. Yeah.
Which seemingly would put to rest this idea that people had said, and I think the players, including Ben Simmons, about the idea of there's a text chain with the team and people are upset about it, and Ben Simmons leaves a group chat. Like I find it highly unlikely that
he refuted it. Yeah, and he refuted that too. Just, I know I'm cutting you off here, but like he talked to JJ about that too, and he was like, that just wasn't true. And he actually said he texted Patty Mills and was like, did I leave a group chain? And Mills was like, no one had talked on that thing for months, right? Or like whatever. So it was these things that come out from one person, Rick Bucher in this case, and it seemed to be refuted through specifics on that case, right? But yeah, but to your overall point, which is like all this other stuff is happening behind the scenes. I mean, the text chain, no, but the other talking stuff was for sure. I mean, that was all Nets folks were talking about at that time.
Oh, yeah. And so there's two levels to this, because they ended up asking him also about the summer, just like they asked Kyrie and what was going on with Kevin Durant, et cetera. But one of the things I found interesting is I don't know if the media or people in general are quite fully equipped at this point just yet to have conversations around physical health and then the mental health side of it. Because I thought Ben, he was ready to hop in and answer questions before they were finished, because they were somewhat boilerplate or familiar ones that he had asking him before.
He did not want any reporter hitting a period or the question mark on the question. He was like happy to start answering well before the whole thing that had been written on the reporter's pad had been out of their mouth.
But it was interesting too, because I thought some of the tones, and the reason why I say it like that is because when you ask somebody about how they physically, he said, yeah, I worked really hard to get back physically, did all the right things. Now it's about managing it, stretching, yoga, all the stuff that I was doing already, but it's about being on top of it to make sure that there aren't any setbacks. And he said he wouldn't step on the court if he wasn't 100% available and ready to play, which he thinks he's going to be. But then when they ask him about the mental side of it, I found it so fascinating. It's like everybody has rough days or everybody has difficulties in their life. The way the media asked it, what they were asking it as if it was just like an ankle. So what are you going to do about that mind of yours? You're going to go ahead and keep that thing intact? Like, how are you going to make it through the season and avoid those dark times coming back? Like, it was such an odd, to me, it felt like odd phrasing of it. Yep. And then he was like, yeah, listen, I worked really hard on myself. And they doubled down on it. They're like, so, but like how? It was like, that'd be like me saying, oh, you do some therapy, pal? What do they talk about in those sessions? What are some of the personal issues that you were sorting through, right? It isn't an ankle. It's not a back. It is a personal element to this thing that I thought the media just really struggled with navigating. I don't know if you found
All right, start with the part where you lie down on the couch. What's the first thing you say? What do they ask? Now, what do you say? Yeah, it's right. It's like, it is funny about that because I think like look, everyone understands this stuff on a high level. Like I think that everyone knows it, but you're right about the part where it's a new world order about asking about it because there isn't like, it's funny because the word therapy is used, physical therapy, emotional therapy. It's all therapy. So, but when it's a back issue or an ankle issue or whatever, it's very easy to talk about because it's very clear timelines. Obviously mental health is a totally different, has no timeline really. Right. So like, but yeah, it is, and they're obligated to ask, but you're right. Like the questions never kind of come out right. And so then the answers aren't right. Like then the answers sound like you're obfuscating, but you're not. Cause you're like you said, it's like, hey, like, what do you want me to do? Like, tell you about my relationship with my mom? Well,
there was this trauma that I had at a young age. And so
when I was 6, here's what happened. I went into school and there was this kid named Derek.
The response is, what did you do when you were having some of those issues? Where's your mind at? You go, I'll put an ice pack on it. I did hot and cold.
Yeah, right. No, but you're right, though. And I think this is going to be one of those situations where, like, we do start to see people like 2 years from now, I think this will be an easier question to answer, right? Or not ask, or just be like, well, people will talk about it more fluidly. And there's just clearly not at a point now. I mean, Simmons, to his credit, was happy to open up about things, about how the mental piece had taken a toll on him, how the point at which that they were in the Hawks series 2 seasons before was not the catalyst, it was the culmination. Like it was like, I've been struggling with stuff up until that point, and that thing didn't help, right? Like he was pretty clear about that part of it. So I'm with you on that part. I do think in terms of like how he answered the questions though, like you can't really ask anything else. Like the guy's in a really tough spot. He's been dragged for a whole year. I think some of the stuff that he gets dragged for is on him. He is a very defiant guy. He's a very confident guy. And I think
3 of those guys on the roster right now.
His sort of bravado, I think, is a little different than the other two. I mean, all professional athletes are super confident guys, especially when you're at this level. Like if you don't have confidence, you just wouldn't have made it to this point. So like you have to be extremely confident, like, because there's lots of really talented people. Sometimes it is the mental piece that pushes you past some of the other guys, right? Like that's just what it is. I do think his is a little bit more aggressive, and I don't mean that in necessarily a negative way, but he's very, I don't know, I guess I'm having trouble describing it, but like how he came off in this and how he came off in the other stuff that we've seen him win recently, which he's been very honest. It's also like not recalcitrant. Like he's clear. I think he's clear that like he was wronged in some way. Like he feels that he feels like he's been given an unfair sort of line with a couple of these things. And I think we definitely saw part of that come out in this media day session, because I think a part of him is like, he doesn't have time for it. I think there's probably a little bit of lack of understanding. Like some of it is placed on him by himself. Like that's just, he wasn't a totally innocent figure in here. Like he did do things, but he's definitely has a different line than Durant and Kyrie.
And there's some other really great talking points as far as the offseason, what was going on with Kevin Durant and with Kyrie Irving and how that impacted him coming in from the trade. But to your point, that is I think it's common where high-level talents in sports sometimes have a hard time seeing what it is that they're responsible for versus what is being put on them, depending on the circumstance.
Yeah, and I have actually one more point about that with him in the media too, which I want to hit. Well, I'll do that in 1 second. First, going to talk to you about our friends over at betonline.net, your number one source for football betting info this season. Hopefully, been with the BetOnline for the first 3 weeks of NFL season, completely crushing it. Up there on college football, too. They have everything you could really ever hope to imagine when it comes to betting information, player developments, matchups, news, podcasts, in-depth articles, analysis. It's all there for you on betonline.net. It's your continued source for all your sports wagering information. It's got the live betting up to the minute scores too, so you're never going to be out in the cold. It's the fastest and easiest way to check on all that great stuff. MLB as we head toward the World Series, maybe MMA on the weekends, boxing, golf. Remember those sports? Head on over to betonline.net. Use your mobile device. You can learn about all the trends, all the different action. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Okay, so before we talk about, I thought a very funny reaction to the question around the offseason getting traded for and then never actually getting to play with these other two superstars. But what was your last thing just about relating to the media and where Ben Simmons was coming from joining the Nets?
Oh, I think he just hates these guys. Like I was like, I just think I think he just hates their guts. I think he's like kind of being not going to be just come right out and say it. But it seems so clear to me based on how he talked with JJ and how he kind of approached this media session. Again, like cutting guys off. I wouldn't even call it rude. Look, it's just like questions and answers. Like this isn't like a manners class, right? So I'm not even taking a dig at him here, but I think that after this past year with the stuff he went through, I think like legacy media specifically, he just has no time for it. Like he hates it. And I think the part of that stems from stuff that came out, which he claims are just lies. Like we just said, like the aforementioned text message thing, the part about the guys flying, out to LA to talk to him, the part about the phone and the Philly practice. He's like, none of that stuff really even happened the way it was reported, and I get dragged for it. And I think he blames the guys in the Sixers for like not having his back. He's correct on that. Like Doc and Joel threw him under the bus hardcore after that series. But I also think like with the media, he's like, dude, I got no time for this. Now it's different with Redick, who's like his ex teammate, right? Mm-hmm. That's a different thing. That's like new media. I think like legacy media though. And when I say legacy media, I mean all the print publications that you can think of, plus like what I would consider to be national TV personalities. He's got like just no time for him at all. And it is kind of hard, or excuse me, it's hard to blame him for that, right? Like it's easy to kind of see him with that. And I don't think he's trying to hide it even in the slightest.
No, and I think it's actually a good situation to be in. I know that Kyrie Irving, we all know Kyrie Irving's had his issues with the media. We know that Kevin Durant doesn't always love it. But the one thing that you can give them compliments on is that they'll sit there though, like, and they'll give you whatever dose they feel comfortable with, but you're going to get that access with them. And I think that can be a nice little buffer for Ben Simmons. Like, hey, you want to talk to Kevin Durant, you want to talk to Kyrie Irving, and I won't be shocked if there are times during the season where maybe Kyrie Irving says, no, I'll go ahead and answer those questions for Ben, because for all of the butting of heads that Kyrie has, I think he likes that dance. To your point, I don't think Ben Simmons even wants to he doesn't want to walk into the gymnasium and try to do the two-step shuffle.
Yeah, the other two invited at times. Yeah. Like it's for sure though. They're pushing back, they're trying to push the ball. Let's talk about the basketball stuff. But I agree with you on that part where those guys will come at the media, but sometimes you're like, feels like you were asking for it on that one.
You gotta having a good time though.
I think you knew what the response was going to be. Like let's put it that way.
100%. On the on the basketball side of it, there's a couple of things. So first, he was asked the question of, in the summertime, you get traded for. Obviously, the injury extends itself. You don't get to play with these guys. Then you hear Kevin Durant request a trade. You also hear maybe Kyrie Irving for a trade partner. Was there ever a time when you thought, oh, come on, we're not going to get a chance to see what this is? And he did give it was a can. He goes, yeah, no, because I can't worry about that the same way Kyrie said it, and so did Kevin. But you could tell he was like, yeah, it did be nice to be with two superstar talents, especially coming off of the run that I've had with my time with the 76ers. The other thing that I really liked that he said was, and I know maybe it sounds cliche, I don't know, but they asked him, how do you feel about other players and their perception of you as a player around the league? Do you think you have anything to prove to them? And again, he cut off most reporters, but in this instance, he cut him off to say, he's like, he's about other people, other players. He goes, no, I couldn't care less about anybody else. I care about my teammates in the locker room and about this organization. I do think you are getting about as focused a Ben Simmons as you could possibly ask for when he is also looking to reset the narrative around himself. He may not care about the narrative, but he cares about the basketball side of it. This is a guy that was one of the top talents under 24 years old. Same theme, right? But for 18 months ago.
Yeah, look, he has a very high opinion of his basketball prowess. That's very clear. Like
As he
he's
should.
proud, and as he should. Like he's proud of what he does really well. I think he's aware of some of the deficiencies. I don't think he wants to talk about it all that much.
He was
But
asked how many threes you're going to take. He said, who knows? So he's
yeah,
ready, he's
right.
ready to
So
fire
and
you.
the answer is probably 0, right? So like whatever. But like I think he has a very high opinion of his basketball talent. He should. Like this guy was borderline defensive player of the year. He's been on like all defensive first team. He's again, like sort of like with Kyrie, he's 2 years away from an all NBA third team. I mean, this is an accomplished guy. It's all again, like Kyrie, it's been completely forgotten. Like because the other stuff has come in. No, but from like a basketball standpoint, I think that like a couple things. Like one, I think that he had to feel probably not bummed, but like worried that he probably wouldn't get the showcase with Durant and Kyrie. Because one, like just from a purely basketball standpoint, he's so much of a better fit with these two guys than he is with Embiid. Like it's just so crystal clear. Like that's not even high level basketball analysis. It's just true. Like he's just such a better fit with those kind of guys than he is with sort of like a traditional ish post up center, like, or as close as the NBA has with one of those guys as a superstar now. So if you're Simmons, and that's why you could hear, like, when someone said, how's it look on the court? He's like, incredible. Like that was his first word. He just
playing
said,
all week.
he's like, it's incredible. And I think that was actually the part where that was the part of the interview. It was almost right away. That was the part of the media day where I was like, oh, these guys are going to be awesome because like he knows it. He knows that like, to not have a chance, like this is the perfect kind of pairing for what his skill set is. Like he doesn't need to create tons of offense, but he can find every guy in every spot. He can be a connector. He's been on record many times as saying he can make every pass, which is true. Like he just does all the things that the rest of the team desperately needs right now. So the idea that it maybe wouldn't have happened coming off what was clearly not the right matchup with him and Embiid had to be like a huge bummer because it was like, this is like, oh my God, I get to play with these two guys who like, I'm used to getting guys like JJ Redick and Marco Bellinelli shots, like right. It's going to be Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant instead. Like this like has an incredibly high ceiling.
And he actually referenced when JJ was on the team and when Bellinelli was about the difference when Embiid was out with injury. And even though those aren't we all know they're not the like for like players, but he referenced Embiid and saying when they asked, what's this going to look like? He said, well, we don't have a guy like Embiid on this team. So obviously it's not going to be the same approach, but it was, the cliche terms that like you're talking about, get out and run, going to want to play at pace, going to want to, be versatile, a lot of different options defensively. He talked about wanting to take on the biggest challenges. Like he has such a pride defensively. I think the reward for him now, to your point about playing with Kyrie and Kevin Durant, is going to be the effort and energy you put on the defensive end is actually going to reap really easy rewards offensively, right? If you're putting in the hard work on a switch and getting a defensive steal, getting a block, getting a quick board off the glass, all of the sudden, you're the best player on the team, Kevin Durant, the next best, Kyrie Irving, they're moving with you. And Joel Embiid is not getting on his horse and launching himself down the court. And that does stunt what some of the best value would be. And arguably what ends up stunting some of maybe the best secondary features of Ben Simmons' game, right? Let me get out and move with you guys. Let me have shooters around me. That includes Joe Harris. It includes, Seth Curry. Having guys like that around Ben Simmons in that point forward, that facilitator role, I cannot see a world where health and everything else assumed, we don't start to see the best version of Ben Simmons of his career so far.
Yeah, I think it's not a foregone conclusion because there's too many other things that have happened with this team. But if you were going to match them up if you were going to place guys and their archetypes and skill sets on a team with these guys, like Simmons would be like one of the perfect pairings, right? Because he can guard guys that Kyrie can't. He can pick up defensive loads on guys to save Durant. Like just on that end, it's so much better. We're going to talk about some of the other matchups here, other ways that it pairs together. But just from those two guys, who you want to pair, and by the way, who like doesn't need to, and here's the other thing too. It's like, this is what people worried about with Harden. It ended up not being the case. But, sometimes when you think superstars, you're like also guys that need the ball a ton in order to like get theirs. And that's not what Simmons' game is predicated on either. It's like his game, he takes a ton of pride in getting other people baskets. Like he's spoken many times about that. None of this is new, but it's just like a refresher course here on what Simmons like is going to bring when it comes to the two superstars.
Yeah, and I think come up in here in a second, the one thing that you mentioned, what are the other players that it impacts? And something that we've talked about before, and any other thoughts that we have coming out of this media day around Ben Simmons, and a lot of other people spoke, a lot of the new faces as well, but just how this seems to now afford the Nets, at least on paper, to develop a real identity about what their style of play is and the consistent ability to do so. So you had mentioned this on a solo episode that you had done, talking about, hey, listen, if guys just aren't hurt, the consistency of minutes, if you just take away dudes, like James Johnson being on the court, all of a sudden things could have looked a lot differently these past couple of years. And that's what you're focusing on now. If you're telling me we get 33 to 35 minutes out of all three of these guys on a consistent basis, it starts to open up a level of one of the best teams in the league. I mean, there's no other really way to frame it. Now, without getting too far afield, there are a lot of other guys that stand to benefit from Ben Simmons being on the floor. And I'm going to this for later, but for another episode in more detail. I think the shooters stand to benefit. A guy like Joe Harris, who gets constantly put into a terrible defensive matchup because he's not that good defensively, but also you didn't have any size. All of a sudden, Ben Simmons is on the court, and then Nicholas Claxton's on the floor, and so is Kevin Durant. Now we got three guys with length. Hey, Joe, why don't you try to be bigger than a guard and be a presence on the floor, right? Like that's a big benefit in that area. But Nicholas Claxton, you'll cut me off here and we'll go a different direction. But Nicholas Claxton, who showed up looking like a totally different person, not just because he looks bigger, but because he's lost the dreads and the hair and it's not bleach blonde anymore. It's a normal, it looks like a different guy. He looks like a totally different human being. And he said in his media, when they asked him about Ben Simmons, he lit up. I think he is as excited as anyone to get on the floor with Ben Simmons and see how that pairing can work. As he mentioned, two guys that can both guard 1 through 5, it opens so much up. Like, I think that he is excited about what Ben Simmons affords him to do as well.
Yeah, look, one thing that Simmons is also going to afford them the ability to do, and it goes with Claxton, is they can just switch everything. That's what they've wanted to do in the past. Defensively, they've not had the personnel to do it, and they still tried, and it didn't really work. But this personnel, they do have pretty much the ability to do it. And while Simmons and Claxton clearly aren't a pairing on the offensive end, like you'll run into some of the same spacing issues that you have, I do wonder, one, the fact that like he's mentioning it, Claxton that is mentioning it, I wonder if they are saying that like this is going to happen a lot together, which means defensively that is going to be like an absolute clamp. Like that is going to be a real problem for just about anybody in the league short of like the very best offensive players, because those guys switching plus Durant plus like kind of anybody else. And especially too, like regular season wise, where like they're not clearly going to hunt everybody for every possession because it's just like not what you kind of do in the regular season. Like this, defensively, this unit could be like a real problem, which is not something. And this is why the other reason that Simmons is it's so nice to finally have him here is we just haven't seen this on this team for a couple years now. Like who's been the best defender on this team? Like Bruce Brown? I don't know, like pound for pound. I don't mean like he's not necessarily like Durant. I mean, like these are like, this is what we're talking about when we come, talk about best defenders. You got to go back to like David Nwaba, to a guy who actually had like real defensive presence. I guess I'm probably underrating Claxton, but
to your point though, I mean, whether it was some injury or just that, then when the superstars weren't on the court, Nicholas Claxton's defensive value kind of goes by the wayside when you don't have any offensive, ability on the floor. So this is a chance to have people fit their roles, right?
Totally. And like these guys being excited to play with this means, I think it's been discussed again, like offensively, it doesn't really work. But if you have three other like, supreme level offensive talents around it, it's not going to be terrible. And we've seen this, we saw lack of spacing last season and they kind of at times were able to get away with it. It will be a problem, but like it'll have so much upside going the other direction in terms of like making transition points or getting out in transition, like forcing transition opportunities, just causing absolute havoc on the defensive end. Like this is the thing. I think Nets fans, especially if Simmons comes out with the way that he kind of, intimated that he's going to, there's a chance that Nets fans just fall absolutely in love here, like really fast. Again, people that follow basketball know that this is what Simmons does. But for a lot of circles, it's just kind of been forgotten. Like the only thing you see from Simmons now is like him not taking that dunk and him sitting out a season. Like that's the thing that's in everyone's mind here. By all accounts, between what Claxton said, what the other guy said, and what Simmons says, like he's ready to go here. And if that's the case, then this will be like one of the best this will be the best defender the Nets have had in years. Like that's really kind of no two ways around it.
And that was that reference that Claxton made. It was like, we're going to be a problem defensively. And
Totally.
and to your point, specifically including Ben in it, is Ben Simmons, Nicholas Claxton, Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and Joe Harris, Kyrie Irving and Seth Curry, Kyrie Irving. It's like, it doesn't matter. Those lineups are good. You're going to carry your weight on the offensive end. I think that there'll be moments when they'll have to figure some things out. But listen, I'll take the offensive congestion at times to have some like Ben Simmons. And again, the role, the niche that he fill when it comes to what you lost when James Harden was gone, and that facilitator, that guy that can thread together some stars, that doesn't want his shot first. So now he's going to be incredibly talented and incredibly willing to set up Kevin Durant, set up Kyrie Irving. That you now get that piece back. And that wasn't something that you were just going to manufacture. You weren't going to get that from Patty Mills. You weren't going to get it from Cam Thomas, from Seth Curry, right? Like, there's nobody else on this roster that was going to be able to take over that role, shy of it kind of coming back into Kyrie Irving's lap. And that's another a really important part, I think, of Ben Simmons' game as it pertains to them. Kyrie Irving gets to stay in a role that he seemingly really loved and flourished in when James Harden was there.
Yeah, and look, I know, I think that, one of the best, like, the hopes.
We getting out over our skis, Doug? You think we're
No, I don't think so. I think that, like, I mean, probably a little bit, but like, what are you gonna do? Like, just be pessimistic? There's nothing to be pessimistic about it here. Like, there's only kind of room for optimism right now. I think the best hope that Nets fans have, and I think just general basketball folks would think, is like, can he be some sort of like Draymond Green like, connector in the offense, right? Where you can play him, where they played Green, they played Draymond with Looney, two non-spacers. Please save yourself the part where like they have a different offensive system. I get it. Like, I'm not comparing the net system to like what Curry and Clay and how those guys in Poole and how those guys constantly run. I know someone's going to leave a comment about that. I totally understand. I'm not.
Let's try.
Yeah, I get it. I went through these streets last year where it was like, just drove me absolutely nuts. But the But the point is, like, you can live with two non-spacers when those other guys are like elite at other things. I'll put it that way. When you're elite at other stuff on the court, like defensively, like being able to thread or be able to connect passes together and connect teammates together, it doesn't become as big of a problem. It's a bigger problem when like your two non-shooters are like James Johnson and DeAndre Brembry. That becomes a problem, right? Because they don't like, and those guys are fine, but like, that's not the two non-shooters I'm talking about here, right? Like, and so I think people sometimes just get in their head non-shooters, and then they just make proclamations.
Oh, yeah, they're all non-shooters. Everybody. There's not a spectrum there. No.
Yeah, it's like, again, like, yeah, James Johnson and DeAndre Bembry was a problem because like literally no one on the team could shoot. Like, that's not the situation we're talking about. And Ben Simmons is, I mean, obviously just many magnitudes better than those guys. But if you're thinking about his role, like, you want to think about him in terms of a Draymond, and think about this team, like maybe sort of how the Warriors were put together, where all the other things that everyone else does well, like score, like play defense, it becomes more than the sum of the parts. And I think that's like the best hope here for the Nets.
I know we're going to get out of here, but we'll come in next time. I really did like a lot. Nicholas Claxton talked about a lot of really good things that I think are worth covering. So did Royce O'Neal. Patty Mills was there. The accent's still as fresh as it ever was. But guys, I mean, you'll get us out the door, Doug, but knocking down 0.1 of 0.2 attempts from beyond the arc for 30% in his final season with Philadelphia, that matters for Ben Simmons. If you extrapolate that out, that's worth like 0.9 tenths of a point.
Yeah, so by the time he hits like 150, he'll have like hit like a whole shot, a whole three-pointer for average a whole three-pointer for a season.
Rainmaker,
Look, there's tons of other stuff to talk about. There's also some injury stuff that came out. We're going to cover this probably tomorrow. Seth Curry, maybe not ready for the beginning of the season. TJ Warren, maybe not ready for the beginning of the season. So we'll get a little more
all sunshine and rainbows.
No, we'll get a little more in depth on that as we go. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe over on YouTube. Seeing those numbers continue to climb. Really, really appreciative of everyone that's jumping in for the new season. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
So it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be really hard, or it is going to be really hard, I should say. And we're going to have to work at this every day. But I want to do that because I want you. I want all of you forever. You and me every day. That's the Notebook.
Yeah. Nicholas Sparks? One of the the Notebook,
right. that old Nicky Sparks, as we all
one of the all-time great American poets. We'll be back again. I'm embarrassed I knew that. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.